What people will experience with AI inside the EMR is going to look as simple as maybe an autocomplete. As you're typing the notes, it's auto-completing, but also it's kind of like that extra set of eyes. You are typing something about their left knee, and it's saying, wait, patient's medical history suggests this was the right knee. Do you want to override? It'll be things like that. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Tony Maritato, a physical therapist and the founder of Total Therapy Solutions, and Choose PT First. Paul and Tony dive deep into how AI can positively impact the PT industry, understanding the liabilities that come with AI, and how healthcare and technology can build a more efficient partnership together. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
I started seeing, just like everybody else who's watching, these ads coming out from multiple AI scribe companies. And they're like, we'll do the note for you. And we're going to, unload and don't burn out and all these things. I'm like, this is the same junk that we heard when EMRs came out. It's the same, thing we've been sold 100 times over. And it feels so good. It's like, oh my gosh, yes, they're going to do the documentation for me. It makes me feel amazing. But we know it's not real. And then as I take a few days and kind of let it ruminate, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. We're the professionals. Ultimately, we're responsible for the liability of the documentation that's being generated. I said, I've used AI documentation off the cuff and it's not accurate enough at this point. And I was like, there is no way. So that being said, I figured let's talk about it. Current events, this is something worth sharing. You're right. I was like, the way they're marketing this product is not the way therapists are thinking. Now, I've never been in the VC world. That's your world. But as I continue to investigate and I started to look at it, I get a sense for the landscape. I get a sense for who's out there, who's doing what. And there's multiple companies kind of in different spaces. But then I had some inbound come in. The floodgates kind of opened a little bit and a lot of VC funded companies started reaching out. So I was like, okay, this isn't going anywhere. There's a lot of money behind it. Let's figure out what is the real application for something like this, And so to your credit, Paul, it's like you said, first I was like, oh, let's check it out. Then I was like, heck no, this is ridiculous. Total waste of time, total waste of money. And I'm happy to discuss where my mind goes when I think of this, but I am going down that road. I did create a small private Facebook group. I did say, look, this isn't going anywhere. We need to figure it out. It's going to look very different for a clinic like mine, where I have a lot of patients coming in and out. I like a lot of people. I like a busy, loud environment. My clinic is more that pub environment, lots of people talking to everyone. Ambient listening, AI scribe is not going to function real well in my environment. Can I use that technology in a way that works for me? I don't think it's going to speed up documentation. I don't think it's going to save me money. I don't think it's going to earn me more money, but I do think there's an application for it. But then I also want to see, well, what's it look like in a, women's health pelvic floor environment? What's it look like in a cash-based practice environment? What does it look like for these other providers, lymphedema? And that's what gets me excited. That's what keeps me in the profession is every time something new comes out, it gives me new opportunity to experiment and figure out where is the real market fit, because I don't think the marketing that they're doing now is talking to the right people and communicating the right message.
Yeah. Well, the other side of this also. So I would say on my end, I would say that I think we're in the first inning of of AI, and I think that where we need to get, in terms of commercialization of this technology, is we need to kind of sort of, it's got to just sort of become in the background, like so. Okay, so the big red flag for me is whenever people tout the technology as the feature or as the benefit, the product's not ready for the market. And I guess where I'm going with this is that on a personal note, my investment stuff, my investment firm, our commercial insurances are all not resetting, but like annual. I can't use my words today, but we got our annual renewals for all of our business insurances, right? And what was interesting is that in our errors and omissions insurance policy, which is a relatively inexpensive one for business practices like mine. But anyway, the point is, though, is that now there's a whole new set of pages attached to the back that explicitly exclude any sort of AI usage from the E&O policy. So in other words, if I was to use, let's just say I filed a claim against my E&O, or let's just say I invested in your company and you filed something against me. If I used according to the way this is written, if I used any sort of AI to interpret maybe the deal terms of what we negotiated, or just in any way, if I leaned on AI to make a decision, it's exempted from the policy, or carved out from the policy. And it sort of made me open my eyes here a little bit, and maybe just suggest to a couple of the practice owners I know to just, if they're going to go down the road of AI, make sure that the insurance policies don't currently or on renewal don't say anything about this, because we're sort of in that first inning still. And I love the examples you used, particularly about how, your practice a little bit noisier and things like that. There's just so many people banging the drum of AI, and the reality is that the technology itself is pretty well. I mean, anybody can build on this stuff now. I mean, you're using ChatGPT. Anybody can build on this stuff. It's really all the gotchas now that are the problem. But let me ask you this though. You um, and I'm maybe mixing this up, but you said something about how it's supposed to speed up documentation. That seems to be like the latest. Like, you and I probably lurk in a lot of the same Facebook forums and stuff, just listening to or watching what people write about. It seems like so much of the value prop right now from a AI marketing standpoint is like, spend less time documenting. And I'm curious, like, you just a few minutes ago, you did say like it's probably not going to help, but I'm curious, like, what did you mean by that? Because it seems like, and I'm not trying to like shoot down all these like new scribes and stuff like that, but you're practicing, you've got to practice, you've got people working there. So actually, I'm going to amend my question to a two-part question. The first is, what did you mean by that? That it's not going to save, and then I guess the second part of this question would be, and you can take a pass on this if you want, is as a practice owner, how do you think about the possibility of one of your employees potentially paying for one of these scribes without your knowledge, and potentially bringing liability onto you unknowingly? So if you want to take a pass. So those are that two-part question, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, no, this is the stuff we need to figure out. We're so early in this world, talking to experts that I look up to, talking to people that I respect that have been around longer than me. Those conversations need to be had. Where's the liability? Who's holding the liability? Who's at risk here? The whole conversation around HIPAA privacy, and talking about like bring your own device and how are you keeping your cell phone private if you're using your cell phone for something like this. All of these things need to be worked out. General liability coverage, like you mentioned, not even on the radar for anybody. So we're going to see a lot of this stuff start to develop. I think the approach that I'm looking at for my business is, okay, as always, I'm more concerned with what I can lose than what I can gain. What are the real risks? What are in the blind spots that I can't even see? That's the stuff that's going to come out and really hurt somebody, hurt me, That's what we're trying to work through. So finding the voices that we can listen to. We did an interview with an individual who was a compliance expert recently on one of the podcasts. Behind closed doors, there are a lot of conversations that I'm hearing about, not just in the PT world, but even in, American Medical Association and physicians, surgeons, things like that. I need to get comfortable with the technology first, just on my end. So I'm playing with different scenarios. I'm playing with several scribes. I've got some relationships that I'm building. I'm looking at how they think it should be used. And you know this better than anyone, Paul. The thing that's so just mind boggling to me is the people who are amazing geniuses, they're engineers, they're creating the product, they're doing all this stuff. They're not in our world. They're not healthcare providers. They're certainly not therapists. So, they're trying to bring therapists on board to get the therapist perspective. Um, but that's tough. That's tough. So I'm in the clinic every day. I'm doing things like using the platform the way it's intended to be used. I'm doing things like using a voice recorder. Now, most of the people watching, we didn't grow up doing dictation. Surgeons, physicians, other healthcare providers are used to dictation. We're not. So I've got videos of me doing dictations, and it is so awkward and so uncomfortable and so painful.
Yep.
When I say it's not going to save time, I recorded myself doing documentation in my conventional manner. It takes me about 3 minutes for a typical, I would consider compliant treatment note. These are notes that have been reviewed by Medicare. They've been through Medicare audits and they've passed. It takes me about 8 to 10 minutes for a full evaluation, including the plan of care. That too has been through Medicare audits and has passed. So I kind of have a pretty good benchmark on the time it takes me. When I'm playing with this new technology, it is way longer than 3 minutes or 8 to 10 minutes. But I do think that there's value in understanding how the technology works. I don't think it's ever going to replace the notes that I am writing, but what it's going to do, hopefully, is improve it, so it can reference source material that my little brain is not going to remember, but the AI brain can bring in and maybe suggest. I think that it could, I might have a bad night. I might have kids in the bed. I might have something going on in my personal life. I don't always bring my highest level of performance to the clinic. And so one of the things that I love about this technology is you can kind of program in the back end, well, look for this and look for that and double check these things. So as a checker, basically a spell check for my documentation, but on does this match the published guidelines for Medicare required elements? Yes or no? Give me a score on this documentation, and the way they are right now, kind of sitting in the browser, they're floating on top of EMRs. They're not really built into or integrated with an EMR. What I like about that, which goes against my original thought, I like the fact that if I can develop some workflows and share my workflows with other therapists, they can glean some,
Yep.
positives from that, and they
Yep.
can build it into their system, even if they're using a different EMR. Now, my first question to the developer was, why the heck are you building this outside the EMR? Why is the EMR company not doing this internally? And I'll tell you, every EMR company that I talk to, they all have plans to do it, but it's not their primary focus right now. So just like anything else, I mean, this might be one of those things that is kind of a short burst. A couple will survive, most will die, but I'm really curious to see where it all goes.
It's going to be native to every EMR soon enough, and obviously I can't speak for the other ones, but I'll just say that it's actually not the limiting factor from a product standpoint is actually not the technology or the capability to build the technology. Just speaking for myself right now, I would say it really has to do with just the very large gray area that exists from a legal and compliance standpoint. Um, if I was to sort of armchair quarterback and maybe sort of guess at the future here, I think that the unpopular truth is that what people I think what people will experience with AI inside the EMR is going to look as simple as maybe an autocomplete. As you're typing the notes, it's auto completing, but also it's kind of like that extra set of eyes. You are typing something about their left knee, and it's saying, wait, the patient's medical history suggests this is the right knee. Do you want to override? It'll be things like that. And then to your point about like the billing, at least in our case, because we've got, over a decade of data available on what claims actually went through and got paid, it's, so the point is, though, is it's sort of, I think the utility of AI right now is kind of marketed as it's the future, and it's, you got to like be ready to use it and all that. And I get why people are doing that. But when it does get past this first inning that we're in, I think it's going to kind of look like Gmail autocomplete, and things like that. And it's going to keep you out of trouble more than it's going to like save you time. Like the key, I think, benefit is really going to be stay out of trouble. Synthesize large amounts of data, that sort of thing.
That's exactly been my approach. Is it's not going to do my job for me. It's not going to replace me, but it's going to help me with the checks and balances. It's going to help me in real time do a quick review, make sure all of my, everything works together, make sure my minutes all add up. So I'm not saying that I
Yes.
did more minutes in CPT codes than I did in total treatment time in minutes. And I do think that as the AIs gain access, for it to go out and reference 2 or 3 established protocols that are out there from Harvard Medical and Mass General, and, to reinforce what I've decided to do in my plan of care as a physical therapist, all of that kind of stuff. I think that's amazing. I think it's wonderful. But the ads that I see on my Facebook feed, and I'm sure you probably see the same thing,
Yep.
it's usually somebody who's just amazed that they hit record, they had their treatment session, they hit stop, and their note was done. That is not reality, at least not reality right now.
Yeah, I think we're a long ways away from this idea of just put a microphone in the room and all that. But yeah, I mean, look, I think the reality is that AI is not going anywhere, and I think that over the long term, here's the thing, and this is what I always say to like non-technical people: is I'll say, do you know what database your favorite product uses? And they're like, no, of course not. But if we scroll back in history to 20 years ago, everybody was talking about MySQL, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server. Like, the technology was trying to find the right solution to solve. Or technology was a solution in search of a problem to solve. And once it did, it sort of is a foundational important layer of technology, but it's sort of abstracted away now. The average user has no idea that they're mostly on MySQL or something like that. And I think that's what's going to happen to AI. On the flip side, Bitcoin and crypto, I think one of the reasons why it's been so slow to adopt, and this is, I might lose some friends on this, is because the more people say Bitcoin or more they say crypto, the less, normal people like my mom want to know about it, and so, anyway, this whole AI thing is going to be really fascinating to watch. And I think you're right. It is going to be on every EMR's product roadmap, but I think most of the delay is not really about capability. It's really more about the legality of it. So we'll see how this goes.
I think this kind of leads into the next topic. You had mentioned Caitlin Clark. We had talked about opportunities, and when I look at going back for a sec, I remember when ChatGPT first came out, and then you started to hear, well, I'm a prompt engineer, right? You had humans that had to understand how to put the prompt in to get the output that we wanted. It was this whole like interpreter kind of position. Same goes for what's going on right now between therapists in the clinic and the engineers behind the computer. Like, those guys are amazing at what they do. Therapists are amazing at what we do, but we need some communicators that can communicate and connect those two. And that, I think, is a massive opportunity for therapists who are willing to explore, step into this gray area between what the technology can do and how we can use it in the clinic. And I think something like that is an example where a therapist could open an 8-figure deal by understanding that, okay, these engineers are creating this incredible technology. How can I explain to the engineer what the therapist in the clinic needs, wants, what the patients need and want, what the third party payers need and want, and do it in a way that brings those two worlds together? I think there's huge value in that. And I think when I talk about Caitlin Clark making 6 figures as a WNBA basketball player versus 8 figures with a Nike contract, this is how therapists do it. But like anything, there's got to be, I don't even know the numbers, hundreds of thousands of athletes that are either playing their sport for the passion and not making any money, playing their sport as a paid hobby for pennies on the dollar, and a very slight, handful of athletes that are at that level where Nike's endorsing them. They've got Adidas sponsorship, all this kind of stuff. I think therapists could do the same.
I agree. I mean, I think so. That particular image that you posted was just so poignant. It was and we'll post the link in the show notes here, but it was sort of a side by side of Caitlin Clark, and it was like it said something like her main deal, 6 figures, and then her side gig, 8 figures or whatever it was, or however it was. But the point is, it was in a very stark way, and I just thought it was really interesting, and I think, certainly anybody listening to this right away and is following along is already probably had that groan where it's like, oh God, here we go. We're going to have influencers in PT, but it's not, if you can get past that sort of like eye roll and sigh, the reality is you're right. I mean, look, I think a big, and this is just one dude's opinion here, a big reason why, in my opinion, a big reason why healthcare technology has not progressed at the same speed as most other industries is what you just described earlier of like the people that are building this stuff are smart, but really have never been in that clinical environment. And on the flip side, the people that actually know this stuff, that are actually touching the patients, also don't really know what those tech people are saying, and so there's a huge opportunity here for somebody to be the liaison that can, in the same breath, speak to somebody with a couple letters behind their name and make them feel good and smart and heard, and then in that same breath, turn to the engineering side or the product side and explain that in a way that matches. So, yeah, I mean, I think. So, what if you were? So I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question without like leading you into the answer. But anyway, so let's say there is a I shouldn't say young, but let's just say somebody is going through PT school now, getting close to graduating, and maybe they're thinking about that idea that you just talked about. I mean, I have some opinions on what I would tell them to do different, but what would you guide them to do? Like, as we lead into this new world, you're sort of alluding to this new world with new technology and influencers and all that stuff. But what advice do you give to somebody that's, potentially in their first job or going to be in their first PT job here soon?
I think it could be anybody that inks an 8-figure deal like that, especially these days. I think one of the things that I would talk to whoever this person is I would say, well, first look at the landscape and see who's already done it. There's a YouTube channel, Athlean X. He's a physical therapist. He's easily doing 10 million a year when you look across his products, across his social media presence, everything that's going on there. We've got Bob and Brad. They have a YouTube channel, again, sponsored deal, product endorsements. They've got tons of stuff. I've got a hunch that they're probably doing 10 million plus a year. Ask Dr. Joe. I mean, there's multiple therapists that have already stepped into this world and they've done it a certain way, but they've also been in this 10, 15, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I was talking to somebody who's kind of newer into the profession, we didn't have AI technology, until recently. We didn't have a lot of the stuff that's going on right now. So my advice to that person is just like anything else. You look for the opportunities, you look at the landscape, you look, where are the problems? the real pain points and what are the most valuable problems. I can treat a patient who has shoulder pain. That's a super important problem to that patient. How valuable that problem is probably depends on the patient. I use the example, if that patient is an MLB pitcher and he's got a $20 million contract, at stake, it's going to be a much more valuable problem than if it's my grandmother who loves gardening, who would like her shoulder to stop hurting, but she's going to do it no matter what.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
you look for the value of the problem, you look at the size of the market. When we start looking at YC funding all of these companies with 500,000 in seed fund, and then where these companies are going, you solve some of their problems. What's that company's problem? They don't have users. They don't speak the language. They're not connected to the culture of physical therapy. So if you can be that liaison between that company, that startup, and our community, our culture. One of my favorite podcasts, they were talking about opportunities right now. And one of the first things they let out with was, I would connect influencers with any level of audience to startup companies because we can see how that will accelerate their growth, bring users, share the culture. And if it's an equity deal, then obviously you're looking at, big paydays down the road. That's exactly what I would talk to anybody who's new to the profession, whether they're a young individual in college or they're a seasoned,
Yep.
professional. I
Yep.
think it's making those connections. And that has nothing to do with insurance reimbursement. That has nothing to do with all the frustrations you hear therapists typically talking about. It goes back to, I'm a problem solver. I'm either going to solve Mrs. Smith's shoulder pain problem, or I'm going to solve this startup venture capital company's problem. I don't care what the problem is. I'm here to solve that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And my advice wouldn't be that different than yours. I just usually tell people it's probably best to start building an audience as soon as you can. And what you do, you can interpret that however you want, but the key is like, look at whatever platform you spend the most time on and start there. And then, like a bad example, but the beauty of the internet is that, you know, so actually let me just talk about this for 1 second. One of my favorite blog posts of all time is this blog post called it's titled 1000 True Fans, and I'm forgetting the author's name now, but
Kevin Kelly.
it's something, yeah, probably, yeah. And it's the original was written like maybe 20 years ago now, and then it's been revised a couple times, but if you Google 1000 True Fans, you'll find the latest version of it. Anyway, in it, what he basically talks about is this idea that as the internet opened up, it allowed you to reach even smaller and smaller niches. So, for example, you know, Nike giving somebody a $10 million contract or whatever the number is, to most people that's a massive number. But when you put it into the context that, Nike is in the business of selling sportswear to aspirational athletes, not the NFL. I mean, there's only a small number of NFL players and MLB players and WNBA players. Those are finite, very small markets. They're going after the 8-year-old girl that looks up to Caitlin Clark, or the 12-year-old boy that looks up to that tennis player or whatever. And so it's important to just put that into context for people, because you're not going to go get a $10 million contract if you're, if that, in small addressable markets. But the point is, though, is that this blog post goes on to talk about this idea that as long as whatever you do has at least 1,000 people somewhere on the planet that want to learn more about that topic, there's an opportunity for you to position yourself as the influencer there. And so whether you then build your own business to serve them, or what we're talking about here, or you become an influencer for somebody else, that it opens all of the opportunities up, as long as you build the audience first. So the other thing I talk about a lot with my own companies I invest in is, I'm like, look, for every 10,000 double opt-in emails you have on your list, we would expect you to make about $1 million a year. That's a big round number, totally like dart at the wall, but just as a general rule, like, you get to 10,000 people reading your stuff or watching your stuff on a very regular basis, that should give you enough attention. And actually, now that I say that, Gary Vaynerchuk, I think, says this all the time, is that attention is sort of the currency now, whether we love it or hate it.
So Seth Godin, it was a Kevin Kelly, 1,000 True Fans. Seth Godin has something similar with your smallest viable audience, building your tribe. I know for me, once I realized that, I was never going to be a famous TikToker. I'm not doing any dances.
Don't give up hope, Tony.
Not doing dances out in the middle of the street, but this whole like AI documentation thing, this just reinforced for me. It's me simply sharing my genuine perspective as truthfully and honestly as I can. There's always going to be a percentage of individuals that resonate with that message, and when we're talking about connecting with a community, that's really what it's about. It's about, I have these certain views, I have these certain perspectives, I feel this way about topics, and I'm just looking for people that share that same view, that same intent. And, one more Seth Godin quote, he says, if you stopped producing that content, would anybody care? And one of the things that I've seen over the years is, yeah, they do. Like when I go on vacation or I stop posting or I focus on something else, the community reaches back out and they're like, hey, what's going on? Where are you? We want to hear from you. So that just kind of reinforces that I'm on the right path. And every single human, especially anyone watching this or listening on the podcast, same thing. You have unique views, but there are going to be communities that resonate with those views. And as you do that, build that platform. Now, when I launch something, there's always a hungry audience ready for it because they know me, they like me, they trust me. It's been years, going on a decade, that I've never really wavered, even when my views change, and they do change because I evolve just like everybody else. I'm the same person, like you can't hold up a fraud for a decade. There's genuine emotion and feeling behind all of the stuff that I share with you guys.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.